The chapel door hung slightly ajar when Thomas Crawford rode past it that October evening in 1879, and something about the sliver of golden lamplight spilling onto the dusty ground made him pull his horse to a halt. He had built that chapel with his own 2 hands 3 years ago after his father died, raised it timber by timber on the edge of his ranch outside Salida, Colorado. And he knew for certain he had locked it that morning before riding out to check the cattle in the eastern pasture. His hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he dismounted, boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the evening quiet. The door creaked when he pushed it open wider, and what he saw inside made him forget entirely about intruders or theft. A woman knelt at the simple wooden altar he had carved, her head bowed and hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wore a travel-stained dress of deep blue cotton, and her dark hair had come loose from its pins to tumble down her back in waves that caught the lamplight. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak or move, watching as her lips moved in silent prayer. He had never seen anyone pray with such intensity, such desperate hope written into every line of her body. Then she opened her eyes and turned to look at him, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest like a key turning in a lock. Her eyes were the color of honey held up to sunlight, and tears streaked her dusty cheeks, but she smiled at him with such radiance that he forgot to breathe. "I asked for you," she said simply, her voice hoarse but steady. Thomas took an uncertain step forward, removing his hat automatically though his mind struggled to make sense of her words. "Madam, I don't understand. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" She rose slowly from her knees, swaying slightly, and he realized she was exhausted to the point of collapse. He crossed the small chapel in 3 long strides and caught her elbow as she stumbled, steadying her against him. Up close, he could see the purple shadows beneath her eyes, the way her lips were cracked from thirst and sun, the trembling in her hands. "I have been traveling for 6 days," she said, looking up at him with those extraordinary eyes. "I came from Kansas. My name is Katherine Reid, and I prayed that God would send me someone good, someone honest, someone who would help me when I had nowhere left to turn. Then you walked through that door." Thomas guided her gently to the rough wooden bench against the wall and helped her sit. "You need water, food." "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. A farmer's wife gave me bread." Catherine's hands twisted in her lap, and he noticed how thin they were, how the bones of her wrists stood out too sharply. "I should not have presumed. I broke into your chapel. I trespassed on your land. I just saw it from the road, and something told me to come inside, told me this was where I needed to be." "Wait here," Thomas said firmly, then realized how foolish that sounded. She looked barely able to stand, let alone run anywhere. "I will be right back. Do not move." He ran to the main house, his mind spinning with questions and a strange feeling he could not name, something like recognition, though he had never seen this woman before in his life. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had already left for the evening, but she had left a pot of stew warming on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Thomas loaded a tray with food and water and a tin cup, then grabbed a blanket from the chest in the hallway before hurrying back to the chapel. Katherine had not moved from the bench. She sat perfectly still, staring at the simple wooden cross above the altar, and something about her stillness worried him more than tears would have. He set the tray beside her and pressed the cup of water into her hands. "Drink slowly," he said, settling onto the bench beside her, not too close but near enough to catch her if she fainted. "Then you will eat, and then you will tell me everything." She drank carefully, her throat working with each swallow, and he saw her close her eyes with relief. When she set down the empty cup, he refilled it and handed her a piece of bread. She ate like someone who had learned to make food last. taking small bites and chewing thoroughly, and it broke something open in his chest to watch her. "I ran away from my stepfather," Katherine said finally, her voice steadier now but still rough. "My mother died 2 years ago of fever. She had married him 5 years before that after my father passed. I thought he was a good man. I thought he would take care of us." She paused, staring down at the bread in her hands. "He did while my mother lived, but after she died he changed, or maybe he just stopped pretending." Thomas felt his jaw tighten, his hands curling into fists on his knees. "Did he hurt you?" "Not the way you are thinking," Katherine said quickly, glancing at him. "But he made it clear what he expected, what he wanted. He started watching me in ways that made my skin crawl. He would stand too close, touch my shoulder or my hair, say things that seemed innocent but were not. I knew it was only a matter of time before watching was not enough for him." She took another small bite of bread, her hands shaking slightly. "So I took what money I had been able to hide away, the little my mother left me, and I left in the middle of the night 3 weeks ago. I have been traveling ever since, working for food and shelter when I could, sleeping in barns or under trees when I could not." "Why Salada?" Thomas asked, trying to gentle his voice though rage burned in his gut at the thought of any man treating a woman that way, especially one under his protection. Katherine looked at him fully then, and he saw something in her eyes he could not quite name, something that felt like fate or providence or one of those words his father used to use when talking about how he met Thomas's mother. "I had a cousin who moved here years ago, married a merchant. I thought perhaps I could find her, that she might help me. But when I arrived in town today and asked after her, they told me she died last winter of pneumonia. Her husband moved back east with their children." Her voice cracked slightly. "I had nothing left. No money, no prospects, nowhere to go. I saw your chapel from the road, and I just walked in and started praying for a miracle." Thomas sat back against the wall, his mind working through everything she had told him. The practical part of his brain, the part that ran a successful cattle ranch and made sound business decisions, told him he should take her into town, find her a room at the boarding house, perhaps help her find work as a seamstress or a teacher. But another part of him, deeper and more insistent, told him that Katherine Reid had not walked into his chapel by accident, that her prayer and his arrival were connected by something larger than coincidence. "I have a proposition," he heard himself say, the words forming before he had fully thought them through. "I need help managing my household. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting older and the work is too much for her alone. I could offer you employment, a room in the house, fair wages." "Respectable work," Katherine's eyes widened. "You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. I could be a thief or worse." "You could be," Thomas agreed, "but you are not. I can see it in you." He met her gaze steadily. "I am a good judge of character, Miss Reid. I have to be, running a ranch this size. And everything in me says you are telling the truth, that you are a good person in a bad situation who needs help." He paused, then added quietly, "My father taught me that when God puts someone in your path who needs help, you help them. No questions, no hesitation. You prayed for someone and here I am. Maybe that means something." Tears welled up in Katherine's eyes and spilled over, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "I do not know what to say. I cannot believe you would be so kind to a stranger." "Say yes," Thomas said simply. "Say you will accept the position. Mrs. Chen will be grateful for the help and you will be safe here. I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be treated with complete respect. This is a proper household, Miss Reid. You will have your own room, your privacy, your dignity." "Yes," Katherine whispered. "Yes, thank you so much." Thomas felt something warm spread through his chest, something that felt dangerously close to joy. He stood and offered her his hand to help her up. "Come." I will show you to the house. You can have the room at the end of the hall upstairs. It has a good bed and a window that looks out over the mountains. Tomorrow, Mrs. Chen will help you get settled properly. Tonight, you just need to rest." Katherine placed her hand in his, and Thomas felt that spark again, that sense of rightness. Her hand was small and calloused from work, but it fit perfectly in his larger palm. He helped her to her feet and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, then guided her out of the chapel and across the yard to the main house. The house was 2 stories, built of good timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Thomas had expanded it 2 years ago. Adding rooms, he told himself, were for future ranch hands or guests, but secretly, he had imagined filling with a family someday. He led Katherine inside and up the stairs to the guest room he had mentioned, lighting the lamp on the bedside table. "The washroom is at the end of the hall," he said, gesturing. "There is water in the pitcher, fresh linens in the chest. If you need anything at all, my room is downstairs, first door on the left. Do not hesitate to knock if you need something." Katherine looked around the room with wonder, taking in the quilt on the bed, the simple but well-made furniture, the cheerful curtains at the window. "This is beautiful. I have not slept in a real bed in weeks." "Then sleep well, Miss Reid," Thomas said softly. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, reluctant to leave though he knew he should. "I am glad you found my chapel. I am glad you were praying there tonight." "So am I, Mr. Crawford," Katherine said, turning to face him with a tired but genuine smile. "So am I." Thomas made himself leave, pulling the door closed behind him and heading downstairs to his own room. But sleep eluded him for hours as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about honey-colored eyes and the way Katherine's hand had felt in his, the way her voice had sounded when she said she had asked for him. He had spent 32 years being practical and responsible, building his ranch, honoring his father's legacy, never doing anything impulsive or foolish. But tonight, he had brought a stranger into his home based on nothing but instinct and the look in her eyes, and somehow it felt like the least foolish thing he had ever done. Morning came cold and clear, the way October mornings did in the Colorado mountains, with frost painting the grass silver and the peaks glowing pink in the early sun. Thomas rose before dawn as always, dressed, and went to start the fire in the kitchen stove. He was measuring coffee into the pot when he heard light footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Katherine entering the kitchen, her hair braided back and her dress brushed clean of dust. "Good morning," she said hesitantly. "I hope it is all right that I came down. I wanted to help with breakfast." "You should be resting," Thomas protested, but she shook her head. "I slept better last night than I have in months. Please let me help. I need to earn my keep, and honestly, I will go mad if I just sit around." She moved past him to the stove, examining the pots and pans hanging on the wall with an appraising eye. "Mrs. Chen will teach me how you like things done, but I am a good cook. My mother made sure of that." Thomas watched her move around the kitchen with growing confidence, pulling out eggs and bacon from the cold cellar, slicing bread with efficient movements. There was something deeply satisfying about having her there in his kitchen, in his home, something that felt both strange and perfectly natural. Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later and took to Katherine immediately, which Thomas had somehow known she would. The older woman had been his housekeeper since his father's time, a Chinese immigrant who had come to Colorado with her husband during the mining boom and stayed after he died in a cave-in. She ran Thomas's household with fierce efficiency and no-nonsense practicality, and he had worried she might be offended by the implication that she needed help. But instead, she embraced Katherine like a long-lost daughter and immediately began showing her where everything was kept, how Thomas liked his coffee, which horses needed special feed. "This is good, Mrs. Chen told Thomas in her accented English when Katherine went upstairs to change the bed linens. "You need young person in house. Get too quiet with just old woman and stubborn rancher." Thomas felt his ears heat. "She needed work, that is all. I am just helping someone in need, Mrs. Chen gave him a look that said she saw right through him, but she only patted his arm and went back to kneading bread dough. "You are good man, Thomas Crawford, just like your father. You see person in trouble you help. But I see how you look at her. I see how she look at you. Maybe this more than just work." "Mrs. Chen," Thomas said warningly, but the housekeeper just laughed and shooed him out of the kitchen, telling him to go check on his cattle and let the women work in peace. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm that surprised Thomas with how quickly it felt natural. Katherine proved to be everything she had claimed, a hard worker who learned quickly and never complained. She helped Mrs. Chen with the cooking and cleaning, mended Thomas's clothes with tiny, perfect stitches, organized the cluttered ranch office, and even helped tend the vegetable garden behind the house. She was quiet but not shy, speaking her mind when she had an opinion but never pushing where she was not wanted. And slowly, gradually, she began to relax, the hunted look fading from her eyes and replaced with something softer, something that looked like hope. Thomas found himself looking for excuses to be near her, coming in for lunch when he usually ate in the saddle, lingering over breakfast coffee, offering to help with tasks she could easily handle alone. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their childhoods, their families, their dreams. He learned that she loved to read, but had been forced to leave her books behind when she fled, that she had a beautiful singing voice she only used when she thought no one was listening, that she had always wanted to see the mountains and thought Colorado was the most beautiful place on earth. She learned that he had inherited the ranch at 24 when his father died of a heart attack, that he had a younger sister married to a banker in Denver who he rarely saw, that he had built the chapel himself because his mother had always wanted one, and his father had never gotten around to it before he passed. Thomas found himself telling Katherine things he had never told anyone, thoughts and feelings he usually kept locked away behind practicality and responsibility. 3 weeks after Katherine arrived, Thomas rode back to the house at sunset to find her sitting on the porch steps, watching the light turn the mountains gold and purple. He tied his horse and climbed the steps, settling beside her with a comfortable silence between them. "I have been thinking," Katherine said softly, not looking at him, "about that night in the chapel, about what I said." Thomas's heart kicked against his ribs. "What about it?" "I told you I prayed for someone, that I asked God to send me help." She turned to look at him now, and he saw vulnerability and something else in her eyes, something that made his breath catch. "But that is not quite true, or not the whole truth anyway." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Katherine drew a breath that shook slightly. "I prayed for more than just help. I prayed for a good man, yes, but also for someone I could trust, someone I could build a life with, someone I could love." She looked down at her hands twisted in her lap. "I know that is foolish. I know I have no right to expect such things. But I was so tired, Thomas, so scared and alone, and I just poured my heart out in that prayer. I asked God to send me someone who would be kind and honest and strong, someone I could stand beside as an equal, someone who would make me feel safe and cherished and valued. And then you walked through that door and I just knew." She gave a shaky laugh. "You probably think I am insane." Thomas reached out slowly and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I think you are the answer to a prayer I never had the courage to speak out loud," he said quietly. "I have been alone for a long time, Katherine. I built this ranch, made it successful, did everything I was supposed to do. But it has always felt empty, like I was building it for someone else, waiting for someone to share it with. And then you were in my chapel, and you looked at me, and everything just clicked into place." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I have tried so hard not to presume, not to hope for more than employment and safety. You have been so good to me, Thomas, so respectful and kind. I did not want to ruin that by wanting more than I deserved." "You deserve everything," Thomas said fiercely, bringing her hand up to press against his heart. "You deserve to be cherished and protected and loved. You deserve a home and a future and someone who will stand beside you through everything. And I want to be that person, Katherine. I want that more than I have ever wanted anything." "Are you certain?" she whispered. "You barely know me. It has only been 3 weeks." "I know enough," Thomas said. "I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you sing while you do dishes when you think no one can hear. And you leave little posies of wildflowers on my desk sometimes. And you always make sure I eat properly, because you worry I work too hard." He cupped her face gently with his free hand, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "I know that when I come home at the end of the day, I look for you first. I know that your smile makes everything lighter, that your voice calms something restless in me. I know that I am falling in love with you, Katherine Reid, and I do not want to fight it anymore." Katherine made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and leaned into his touch. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I started falling the moment you walked into that chapel, and your first thought was to help me, to offer me water and food and safety. You did not question or judge. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped. How could I not love you for that?" Thomas drew her closer, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, but she did not. She came willingly into his arms, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home, like finding something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and new beginning, and when they finally drew apart, both of them were shaking. "Marry me," Thomas said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it is too soon. I know you might need time, but I do not want to wait. I want you to be my wife, Katherine. I want to build a life with you, fill this house with children and laughter and love. I want to grow old beside you and know that you are mine and I am yours. Will you marry me?" Katherine laughed through her tears, joy radiating from her like light. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. How could I say anything else when you are everything I asked for, everything I never dared to hope I would find?" Thomas kissed her again, deeper this time, letting himself pour all the loneliness and longing of the past years into it, all the love he had been holding back for weeks, and Katherine kissed him back with equal fervor. They were so lost in each other that they did not hear Mrs. Chen come onto the porch until she cleared her throat loudly, making them spring apart like guilty teenagers. "About time," Mrs. Chen said dryly, but she was smiling so wide her eyes nearly disappeared into crescents. "I tell you weeks ago this more than work. Now, you stop kissing on porch where whole ranch can see and come have dinner. Then we plan wedding. Not too long engagement, yes. I am not getting younger, want to see babies before I die." Thomas felt his face go scarlet, but Katherine just laughed, bright and uninhibited, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They followed Mrs. Chen inside hand in hand, and that night over dinner, they made plans for a wedding in the chapel where they met, 1 month from today. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas rode into Salida to speak with the minister, a kind older man named Reverend Walsh who had known Thomas's parents and was delighted to hear of his engagement. Katherine worked with Mrs. Chen to alter a cream-colored dress that had belonged to Thomas's mother, stored carefully in tissue paper in the cedar chest in the attic. It needed taking in at the waist and letting out slightly in the bust, but the lace was still perfect, delicate as frost, and the silk had held its color beautifully. She would be so happy, Thomas said when Katherine showed him the dress on its hanger, his voice thick with emotion. My mother always wanted me to find someone special, someone who would love this place as much as she did. She would have adored you. Word spread quickly in Salida that the Crawford Ranch would be hosting a wedding, and people Thomas barely knew stopped him on the street to offer congratulations. Many of them were curious about Katherine, about where she had come from and how they met, but Thomas kept the details vague, saying only that she had been traveling through and they had fallen in love. He could see the speculation in some eyes, the whispered questions, but he did not care. Let them gossip all they wanted. He knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. 2 weeks before the wedding, Katherine woke in the middle of the night screaming. Thomas heard her from his room downstairs and took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into her room without thinking, his heart pounding. He found her sitting up in bed, shaking violently, her face white as bone in the moonlight. "Katherine, what is wrong?" he asked urgently, sitting beside her on the bed and pulling her into his arms. "Did you have a nightmare?" She clung to him, her fingers digging into his nightshirt, her breath coming in short gasps. "My stepfather. I dreamed he found me, that he dragged me back to Kansas. It felt so real, Thomas. I could feel his hands on me, hear his voice telling me I belonged to him." Thomas held her tighter, fury and protectiveness surging through him in equal measure. "He will never touch you again. I swear to you, Katherine, if he comes anywhere near you, he will answer to me. You are safe here. You are safe with me." "What if he comes looking for me?" Katherine whispered against his chest. "What if he finds out where I am?" "Then I will handle it," Thomas said firmly. "Kansas is a long way from Colorado, sweetheart. The chances of him tracking you here are slim. But even if he does, you are not alone anymore. You have me, and I will protect you with my last breath if I have to." He eased back enough to look at her face, brushing her tangled hair back gently. "I need you to believe that. I need you to trust that I will keep you safe." Katherine looked up at him with those honey-colored eyes, still shadowed with fear but also with trust, with love. "I do trust you. It is just hard sometimes, letting go of the fear. It has been my constant companion for so long." "I know," Thomas said softly. "But you do not have to face it alone anymore. We will face it together, all right? Whatever comes, we will handle it side by side." Katherine nodded and let him hold her until her breathing evened out and the shaking stopped. Thomas knew he should leave, should go back to his own room and preserve propriety, but he could not bring himself to let her go. So he lay down beside her on top of the covers, keeping her safe in his arms while she drifted back to sleep, and he stayed there until the first light of dawn crept through the window. Mrs. Chen found them that way and made no comment beyond a knowing look, but after that night, she began leaving Katherine's door slightly ajar and placing a chair in the hallway where Thomas could sit if Katherine needed him in the night. It was not entirely proper, but Mrs. Chen understood that sometimes healing required more than propriety, that sometimes what a wounded soul needed most was simply to know someone was there, keeping watch. The nightmares came 3 more times before the wedding, but each time, Thomas was there to wake Katherine and hold her until the fear passed, and each time, it seemed to fade a little faster. He loved being the one who could soothe her fears, who could make her feel safe. It filled something in him he had not realized was empty, gave purpose to all the strength and steadiness he had built into his character over the years. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides and the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Thomas dressed in his best suit, dark wool that his mother had made for his father and that he had altered to fit, and tried to calm the nervous energy jumping through him. He was not nervous about marrying Katherine, not for a second. But he wanted everything to be perfect for her, wanted this day to be the new beginning she deserved. The small chapel filled with guests, ranchers and townspeople from Salida, Mrs. Chen's friends from the Chinese community, even Thomas's sister Emma, who had made the journey from Denver with her banker husband. Thomas stood at the altar, Reverend Walsh beside him, and watched as the door opened and Katherine appeared, backlit by autumn sunshine. She looked like an angel in his mother's dress, the lace draping her shoulders and arms like clouds, the silk skirt rustling softly as she walked. Mrs. Chen had woven wildflowers through her dark hair, and she carried a simple bouquet of the late blooming mountain asters that grew along the creek. But it was her face that stole Thomas's breath, the pure joy shining from her like light, the love in her eyes as she looked at him walking down that short aisle. Mrs. Chen gave her away, placing Katherine's hand in Thomas's with a satisfied nod, and Thomas held on tight, marveling that this incredible woman was about to become his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of words and promises, of love and honor and cherishing, and when Reverend Walsh finally pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Katherine with all the love in his heart, not caring who was watching, needing her to know that this was forever, that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of the gift she had given him. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing in the yard outside the ranch house. Thomas danced with his bride until his feet ached, then danced some more, holding her close and breathing in the scent of wildflowers in her hair. Emma pulled him aside at one point, tears streaming down her face, and told him she had never seen him so happy, that their parents would have been so proud. He hugged his sister tight and introduced her properly to Katherine, and watching them talk and laugh together, he felt his heart swell with gratitude for this life, this moment, this woman who had stumbled into his chapel and changed everything. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Thomas and Katherine stood on the porch, waving goodbye, her hand nestled in his. When the last wagon had rolled away down the road toward Salida, Thomas turned to his wife and lifted her into his arms, making her laugh with surprise. "What are you doing?" Katherine asked, her arms looping around his neck. "Carrying you over the threshold," Thomas said, pushing open the door with his shoulder. "It is tradition, and I intend to honor every single tradition that involves holding you." He carried her through the house and up the stairs to what was now their room, the master bedroom that had stood empty for so long. Mrs. Chen had prepared it while they were at the celebration, filling vases with flowers, turning down the bed, lighting candles that filled the room with soft golden light. Thomas set Katherine down gently and looked at her, really looked at her, his wife, his love, his answer to prayers he never knew how to voice. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for praying that night. Thank you for asking God for me. Thank you for being brave enough to run, strong enough to survive, and trusting enough to let me love you." Katherine's eyes filled with happy tears, and she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too. Thank you for walking through that door. Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for giving me a home and a future and a love I never thought I would find. You are my miracle, Thomas Crawford." They came together then, husband and wife, in the sweet intimacy of new marriage, discovering each other with tenderness and passion and profound joy. And later, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight, Catherine's head on Thomas's chest and his arm wrapped securely around her. Thomas thought about fate and providence and answered prayers, about how a woman kneeling alone in a chapel and a man riding past at just the right moment could lead to something as perfect as this. The first year of their marriage was the happiest of Thomas's life. Katherine took to ranch life like she had been born to it, learning to ride and rope, helping with the branding and roundups, managing the household accounts with a sharp mind for numbers that impressed even Thomas. She was not content to be just a rancher's wife in name only. She wanted to be his true partner, and Thomas loved her all the more for it. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life that was equal parts passion and partnership, love and respect. Catherine's nightmares faded and then stopped altogether as the months passed, replaced with dreams of the future, of the family they would build together. In early spring, Katherine missed her monthly courses and spent 3 days being violently ill every morning before she finally told Thomas she thought she might be expecting. He whooped with joy and spun her around the kitchen until Mrs. Chen scolded them both for being foolish, though she was crying with happiness herself. Thomas became impossibly protective, trying to wrap Katherine in cotton wool and keep her from doing any work, until she finally sat him down and explained gently but firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and would continue to help run their ranch until the baby came. Their son was born on a snowy December night in 1880, arriving fast and furious after only 6 hours of labor. Thomas held Katherine's hand through it all, ignoring her attempts to shoo him from the room, refusing to leave her side even when the midwife from town clucked disapprovingly at his presence. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Thomas cut the cord with shaking hands and placed the tiny boy on Katherine's chest, then collapsed into a chair with relief and overwhelming love. They named him James Michael Crawford, after both of their fathers, and he had Katherine's honey-colored eyes and Thomas's dark hair. Thomas had never imagined he could love anything as much as he loved Katherine, but holding his son for the first time, feeling that tiny weight in his arms and looking down at that impossibly small face, he discovered new depths to his heart he had not known existed. Katherine proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical and unflappable. She nursed James while managing the household accounts, wore him in a sling while supervising the ranch hands, sang him to sleep with lullabies that made Thomas's throat tight with emotion. Watching her with their son, Thomas fell in love with her all over again, deeper and more completely than he had thought possible. James was 6 months old when the stranger appeared at the ranch. Thomas was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when one of the hands came running to tell him there was a man at the house, asking questions about Katherine. Thomas felt ice slide down his spine, every protective instinct roaring to life. He ran to the house to find a thin, hard-eyed man standing on the porch, facing off against Mrs. Chen, who blocked the door with her tiny body, a rolling pin gripped in her hand like a weapon. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked coldly, positioning himself between the stranger and the house. The man turned to look at him, and Thomas saw the meanness in his eyes, the entitled set to his mouth. "I am looking for my stepdaughter," the man said. "Katherine Reid. I was told she might be in this area. She ran away from home over a year ago, and I have been searching for her ever since. She stole money from me when she left, and I aim to see justice done." Thomas felt rage bubble up hot and fierce, but he kept his voice level, his face expressionless. "I do not know anyone by that name. You must have been given bad information." "Really?" the man said, his eyes narrowing. Because I spoke to some folks in Salida who mentioned the Crawford Ranch had taken in a young woman about that time, that she married the owner pretty quick. Seems like an awful coincidence. Seems like someone was gossiping and you heard what you wanted to hear, Thomas said flatly. My wife is Katherine Crawford, born and raised in Denver. We met through my sister. Now I will ask you politely one time to leave my property, and then I will make you leave. The stepfather took a step forward, his hand moving toward his hip where Thomas could see the outline of a pistol. I do not think you understand the situation. If that girl is here, she is coming back with me. She is my stepdaughter, and the law says she belongs under my roof until she turns 21 or marries with my permission. Now, this marriage, if there was one, it was not legal without my consent, so you are harboring a runaway and a thief. Thomas's hand moved to his own gun, faster than the other man could track. First, my wife is 23 years old, not that it is any of your business. Second, you are wrong about the law. A woman of legal age does not need anyone's permission to marry. Third, if you take one more step toward my house or say one more word about my wife, I will shoot you for trespassing. That is not a threat, that is a promise. They stared at each other for a long moment, tension crackling in the air between them. Then Katherine's voice came from inside the house, sharp with command. Thomas, let him in. Katherine, no, Thomas protested, but she was already pushing past Mrs. James on her hip, her face set with determination. Hello, Walter, Katherine said coldly to her stepfather. You are a long way from Kansas. Walter's eyes went to the baby and Thomas saw calculation flicker across his face. You have a child. That complicates things. It does not complicate anything, Katherine said. I am married, legally and properly, to Thomas Crawford. I have a son, a home, a life. You have no claim on me, no right to be here. I do not know what you think you will accomplish by coming here, but you need to leave. You stole from me, Walter said. That money your mother left you, that was mine by rights. You had no business taking it. That money was from my father, Katherine said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. My mother put it aside for me before she died, made sure it was separate from your accounts. It was mine, and I took what belonged to me when I left. You have no legal claim to it. We will see what a judge says about that, Walter threatened. I can make trouble for you, Katherine. I can tell everyone in this town how you ran away in the night like a thief, how you stole money and lied about your age to trick some fool rancher into marrying you. I can make your life very difficult. Thomas moved then, stepping between Katherine and Walter with murder in his eyes. Or you can leave right now and never come back, and I will pay you $1,000 to sign a legal document renouncing any claim on Katherine or her inheritance. That is far more than you deserve and far more than whatever pittance she took from you. But it will be worth it to me to know you will never bother us again. Walter's eyes widened with greed. $1,000 was a fortune, more money than he probably made in 5 years of whatever work he did. Make it $1,500. $1,200, Thomas countered. And you sign the papers today, in front of a lawyer in Salida. You will also sign a statement that Katherine never stole from you, that any money she took was rightfully hers. Then you will get on your horse and ride out of Colorado, and if you ever come back, I will kill you. That is the deal. Take it or leave it. Walter looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. You have a deal. Thomas arranged for the lawyer to meet them in town that afternoon. He brought 3 of his hands with him as witnesses and insurance against Walter trying anything stupid. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Adelaide Morrison, who Thomas trusted implicitly, drew up the papers quickly, and Walter signed them with a scrawl that betrayed how rarely he wrote anything. Thomas counted out $1,200 in banknotes. Money that hurt to part with, but that he would have paid 10 times over to secure Katherine's safety and peace of mind. "If I ever see you in Colorado again," Thomas said quietly as Walter stuffed the money into his pocket, "I will not bother with lawyers or deals. I will shoot you on sight and let the law sort it out after. Are we clear?" Walter nodded, some of the meanness finally gone from his eyes, replaced with something that might have been fear or respect or both. "Crystal clear. You are a lucky man, Crawford. That girl is worth more than you probably know." "I know exactly what she is worth," Thomas said. "That is why I am doing this. Now get out of my sight." Walter left, riding toward the Kansas border, and Thomas watched him go until he was nothing but a speck on the horizon. Only then did he allow himself to relax, the tension draining from his shoulders. Katherine had stayed at the ranch with the baby, and he rode home as fast as he dared, needing to see her, to hold her, to reassure himself that she was truly safe now. He found her in the chapel, kneeling at the same altar where he had first seen her, James sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her. She looked up when he entered, tears streaming down her face, and Thomas crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "It is done," he said into her hair. "He signed the papers. He is gone, Katherine. He can never bother you again." Katherine sobbed against his chest, her whole body shaking with relief and residual fear and gratitude. $1,200, Thomas. That is so much money. You should not have had to pay him anything. It was worth every cent to know you are truly free," Thomas said fiercely. "I would have paid 10 times that, 100 times. You are worth more to me than any amount of money. You and James are my whole world." They held each other for a long time in the quiet chapel, their son sleeping peacefully beside them, and Thomas thought about how far they had come from that first night, how much they had built together. Katherine had come to him broken and afraid, and he had been lonely and closed off, and together they had healed each other, made each other whole. "I was praying again," Katherine said softly, easing back to look up at him, "thanking God for you, for this life. For the miracle of that night when I walked into this chapel and found exactly what I needed." "We found each other," Thomas corrected gently. "And I am the one who should be grateful. You gave me everything I was missing, everything I did not even know I wanted. You made this house a home, Katherine. You made me complete." Katherine smiled through her tears and stood on her toes to kiss him, sweet and lingering. "We should go back to the house. Mrs. Chen will want to know what happened, and James will be hungry soon." But before they left the chapel, Thomas took Katherine's hand and pressed it against his heart, the way he had that night on the porch when he first told her he was falling in love with her. "I want to say it again, Katherine Crawford. I love you. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. Thank you for asking for me. Thank you for letting me be the answer to your prayer." "I love you too," Katherine whispered, "always and forever." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their son between them in his basket, and Thomas knew that whatever the future brought, they would face it together, the way they had faced everything else. They were bound by more than marriage vows, more than love. They were bound by faith and providence, and the miracle of 2 broken people finding each other at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their family. Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth, when James was 3 years old. She had Thomas's strong features but Katherine's delicate coloring, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father everywhere, determined to be a rancher just like him. 2 years after Grace came twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, who were holy terrors from birth and kept Katherine and Thomas running from dawn to dusk. Mrs. Chen declared herself too old for such chaos, but spent half her time spoiling the twins rotten and teaching them Chinese words that usually turned out to be something inappropriate, much to Katherine's exasperation and Thomas's amusement. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Katherine's joint management, growing from a modest cattle operation to one of the most successful ranches in central Colorado. Katherine had a head for business that complemented Thomas's practical knowledge of ranching, and together they made decisions that expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and built relationships with buyers and suppliers that ensured steady income even in difficult years. James grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as cattle, and spent hours in the ranch office poring over accounts and livestock records. Grace became the daredevil of the family, able to outride most of the hands by the time she was 10, fearless and wild and fiercely protective of her younger brothers. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a language that seemed to consist mostly of looks and gestures that no one else could interpret. When James was 12, he asked Thomas about the chapel one evening as they were checking the horses before bed. "Why did you build it, Pa? We go to church in town most Sundays anyway." Thomas looked at his son, seeing the intelligence in his eyes, the genuine curiosity. James was old enough now to understand, to appreciate the truth. "I built it for your grandmother who always wanted a place to pray on the ranch. But I think God had other plans for it. That chapel is where I met your mother, James. It is where our family really began." He told his son the story then, about finding Katherine praying alone that October evening, about how she had opened her eyes and told him she had asked for him. James listened with wide eyes, and when Thomas finished, the boy was quiet for a long moment. "So Ma ran away from someone bad," James said finally. "She was brave." "She was incredibly brave," Thomas agreed. "And she is still brave every single day. Never forget that about your mother, son. She is the strongest person I know." James nodded seriously. "I will not forget, and Pa, I am glad she found your chapel. I am glad you walked through that door." Thomas pulled his son into a hug, this boy who was growing so fast, who would be a man before Thomas was ready. "So am I, James. Every single day I am grateful for that moment." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Katherine back to the chapel at sunset, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen despite their protests. They walked hand in hand across the yard, the mountains glowing pink and gold in the fading light, and stepped inside the small building that had been witness to the beginning of their love story. "You remember what you were praying for that night?" Thomas asked softly, pulling Katherine close. "Of course I remember," Katherine said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I asked for someone good and honest and strong. I asked for someone who would make me feel safe and cherished. I asked for a partner, an equal, someone who would love me as I am." She looked up at him with those honey-colored eyes that still had the power to steal his breath after all these years. "And God sent me you, Thomas. He sent me everything I asked for and so much more than I ever imagined." Thomas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You gave me everything I was missing. Before you, I had a ranch but not a home. I had success but not joy. I had built a life but I was not really living it. You changed all that. You and the children, you are my entire world." "We have had a good life," Katherine said contentedly. "We have built something beautiful together." "We have," Thomas agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years and years ahead of us, Katherine. Decades, God willing. I plan to love you until I am old and gray and can barely climb onto a horse anymore." Katherine laughed, the sound echoing sweetly in the small chapel. "You are already going gray, Thomas Crawford. I found 3 more gray hairs this morning when you were shaving." "Whose fault is that?" Thomas teased. 4 children, a ranch, a wife who insists on learning to break horses herself despite my protests. It is a wonder I am not completely white. They stayed in the chapel until full dark, talking and laughing and simply being together, away from the demands of children and ranch and daily life. And when they finally walked back to the house, arms around each other, Thomas sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the night a desperate woman had broken into his chapel, for the moment he had walked through that door, for the miracle of loving and being loved by Katherine Reid Crawford. The children grew and eventually left home one by one to forge their own paths. James took over management of the ranch when Thomas turned 62, running it with the same careful attention to detail and innovation that his parents had taught him. He married a teacher from Salida named Margaret, a smart, kind woman who Katherine adored, and they gave Thomas and Katherine 6 grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and chaos and joy. Grace shocked everyone by moving to Denver and becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Colorado. She married late, at 34, to a fellow lawyer who was brave enough to match her formidable spirit, and they had 2 daughters who inherited their mother's fearlessness and their grandmother's business sense. Samuel and Daniel never did separate. Running a horse breeding operation together on land, Thomas deeded to them when they turned 25. Neither married, content with their partnership and the company of horses, though they doted on their nieces and nephews with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. Thomas and Katherine grew old together on the ranch they had built, aging gracefully into their 60s and then 70s, their love deepening with each passing year. They took walks together every evening, still holding hands like newlyweds, still finding new things to talk about, new dreams to share. Thomas's hair went white and his back bent slightly, but his eyes were still sharp, and his love for Katherine burned as bright as ever. Katherine developed arthritis in her hands but refused to stop helping in the garden, refused to give up the work she loved even when it hurt. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. The chapel was too small to hold everyone, so they held the party in the barn, decorated with flowers and bunting, filled with food and music and love. Thomas and Katherine danced together just like they had at their wedding, moving slowly now but still perfectly in sync, still looking at each other with the same love and devotion that had brought them together half a century before. 50 years, Katherine said, her head on Thomas's shoulder as they swayed to the music. Can you believe it? Every single day, Thomas said. I can believe every single day because I lived them with you. Every morning I woke up grateful that you were beside me. Every night I thanked God for the miracle of you. Katherine's eyes filled with tears, happy ones, and she held him tighter. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would walk into that chapel again and pray for you, and I would choose you every single time. They kissed, soft and sweet, and their children and grandchildren cheered, the sound filling the barn with warmth and love. And later, when the party was winding down and the grandchildren were falling asleep in various corners, Thomas and Katherine walked one more time to the chapel, this place that had been the beginning of everything. I still pray here sometimes, Katherine confessed as they stood looking at the simple altar. I pray for our children and grandchildren. I pray in gratitude for the life we have had. And sometimes, I just come and sit here and remember that night, remember the girl I was, so scared and alone, and I marvel at how far I have come. Thomas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. That girl was brave and strong, and she grew into the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I am so proud of you, Katherine. I am so proud of us, of what we built together." "It all started here," Katherine said softly, "with a prayer and an answer, with faith and hope and love." "And it will never end," Thomas said firmly. "What we have, what we built, it will live on in our children and their children. The love we share, it is eternal." Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who had been her salvation and her partner, her love and her best friend for 50 years. "I love you, Thomas Crawford. Thank you for walking through that door. Thank you for being the answer to my prayer." "I love you too," Thomas whispered. "Thank you for asking. Thank you for being brave enough to pray, to hope, to believe that something better was possible. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Katherine. We saved each other." They stood together in the chapel as darkness fell. Two souls bound by faith and providence and a love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle. And when they finally walked back to the house, their home filled with the laughter of their descendants, Thomas sent up one final prayer of gratitude for the miracle of that October night so many years ago, when a desperate woman had knelt in his chapel and asked for him, and he had walked through the door to find his destiny waiting. Thomas Crawford lived to the age of 87, and Katherine to 85, and they died within months of each other, worn out from full and rich lives but at peace with the world and each other. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery on the ranch, next to the chapel where they had met, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives and the words, "United by prayer, bound by love." Their children made sure the chapel was maintained for generations, keeping it just as it had been that night in 1879, a testament to the power of faith and the miracle of two people finding each other at exactly the right moment. And for years afterward, people in Salida would tell the story of the rancher who found a woman praying in his chapel alone, who heard her say she had asked for him, and who built a love story that lasted a lifetime and beyond. James Crawford, who lived to be 93, would tell his own grandchildren about his parents whenever they asked about the chapel. He would describe that October evening when a desperate young woman had broken in to pray, how his father had walked through the door at just the right moment, how their love had bloomed from that unlikely beginning into something beautiful and eternal. "Love like that does not come along often," James would say, his eyes distant with memory. "But when it does, when you find someone who feels like an answer to a prayer you never knew how to speak, you hold on tight and never let go. That is what my parents taught me. That is their legacy." And the Crawford Ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, generation after generation working the land, raising cattle, building their own love stories. But everyone agreed that none of them were quite as magical, quite as perfect, as the story of Thomas and Katherine, the rancher and the woman who prayed for him, who found each other in a small chapel on a Colorado ranch and built a love that would echo through the ages, a testament to faith, hope, and the miraculous ways that prayers are sometimes answered in the most unexpected and beautiful of ways.